Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm Stacey Evans, your state representative for District 57, and State Senator Sonya Halpern is on her way. We have been tag teaming these town hall meetings for a couple of years now, and so I'm excited that we're going to continue to do so, but she was playing double duty tonight, and so she's finishing up a speaking engagement and rushing back to her house, and she will log in. Kennedy McClung is on the line. She is my chief of staff, and a lot of y'all I know have met her at the various neighborhood and MPU meetings. She's someone who's always available to help you if you can't get me, but of course you can always reach out to me directly. And before we end tonight, I will make sure that I put my contact information in the chat for those of you that might not already have it. And of course, Senator Halpern will do the same. What we're going to do tonight is give you a rundown of what happened up into the crossover day, which was Monday. We were at the Capitol until about midnight on Monday, and some things crossed over and some things did not. Some did not cross over because they got an affirmative no vote, and some did not cross over because they just never got a vote. Of course, the biggest thing that did not cross over was something that didn't cross over from the Senate. And that was, of course, the city of Buckhead City. But I'm going to let Senator Halpern tell us all about that because she had a front row seat for that over at the Senate. And I'll just say I'm very, very glad that that is not something that will be crossing over to our House chamber, and good riddance to that legislation. I want to say hello to our city council person, Alex Wan. I see him on the line, and appreciate him being with us tonight. We've been able to, hey Alex, we've been able to work together very well on the intersection of state and city, and I'm really glad that he's here tonight to lend his voice. So what didn't pass the House? A lot. It's been a very calm session from the perspective of the House. There are a couple of controversial measures that led me to go to the well and speak against bills, but not as much as in prior years, to be honest, and not as much controversial, hot political button issues in the House. Now, the Senate is a different story, and you'll hear more about that from Senator Halpern. But on the House side, it was relatively tame. A disappointing piece of to me, a disappointment in legislation that did not get a vote in the House was sports betting legislation. A lot of y'all know that this is something that I've been working on for a number of years. Sports betting is something that Georgians are already participating in at high levels. It's something that people are doing online, and it's not regulated. So there's no safety measures there, and we're missing out on the revenue. And if we had passed sports betting this year, that revenue would have been earmarked for Hope and Pre-K, which of course are two amazing educational programs that we have here in the state and are very important to me, particularly Hope. The other reason is that a lot of you know, some of you may not know, that I had been successful in getting language in the legislation that would force spending of these excess reserves that we've been piling up. Every year, the lottery takes in all the money that it takes in, and all this money goes into a lottery for education fund, and Hope funds come out, Pre-K funds come out, and then there's a lot of money that's been left over, piling up ever since 2011, and we're required to hold 50% of everything that we spend on Hope and Pre-K the prior year. We have to hold that in a reserve. That's a very conservative reserve amount. It's responsible. We definitely don't want to run out of money to be able to fill the needs for Hope and Pre-K in future years. So that number that we're required to hold right now is about 800 million. We are holding 1.9 billion with a B. So that means we're holding 1.1 billion with a B more than we have to hold. And I've maintained for a while that Georgians did not approve the lottery in the early 90s just to have a lottery. They approved it to fund education. And so I think that Georgians would be very disappointed to know how much money is piling up and not being spent for the good of the state. So some language that would force spending of those extra reserves over time was also in that, was also in the sports betting bill, but of course, since that didn't pass, neither did the reserve language. The other big disappointment for me and what didn't pass the House, and honestly, not only did it not get a vote on the floor, it didn't even get a committee hearing, and that was a bill to protect the Okefenokee Swamp from mining. Representative Darlene Taylor, a Republican from South Georgia, introduced House Bill 71. It had 91 signers, 91 co-sponsors. And for those of you who are looking for trivia, 91 is the number you need to pass a bill. So this bill had 91 sponsors, so certainly it would have had 91 votes. But Representative Taylor was not able to even get a hearing on this bill, which is very, very disappointing. So she has just today came by my desk. Sorry, the pollen is killing my throat, y'all. So Representative Taylor came by my desk today. I know she came by. All of us who signed on the Okefenokee Swamp Bill, at least a bill to study the issue over the interim. So we'll see if that has more success than the Okefenokee Swamp Bill itself. The other big things that did not happen in the House were any hearings on various pieces of very good common sense gun legislation, gun safety legislation to have safe storage laws so that we don't have guns getting into the hands of our children, background checks, waiting periods, just very, very common sense gun legislation did not pass. Of course, what did pass, and those that subscribe to the newsletter know that we did pass a bill called the School Safety Act. Excuse me, and that bill requires schools to hold intruder drills, which is a good thing. We want our kids and our teachers to be prepared in the instance of an intruder in a school shooting. And obviously that's a very real threat in today's environment. But to me, this was a really irresponsible of the legislature to essentially throw its hands up and say, nothing we can do, nothing we can do. You're going to have to just deal with these intruders and go, let me teach you how to run and hide. That's essentially what we said. We said, there's nothing else we can do. You teachers, you kids, you go deal with it. And as a mom of 2 children who are doing these intruder drills right now, my almost 4-year-old and my 11-year-old do these intruder drills, and my daughter's been doing them since kindergarten. My son's been doing them since he entered preschool, a 2-year-old preschool at a local church. It's really heartbreaking to hear them describe, and some of you on this call have no doubt heard your own grandchildren or children explain to you how these drills work. They have to do it because they don't have any other choice, but we as the legislature, we have so many more tools at our disposal, and it's very disappointing that we've chosen not to even hear legislation that could give us other options. So those are a couple of things on the House side that did not pass. And Kennedy, if you see Senator Halpern pop in, I'll stop talking about the House for a second, let her tell us about the excitement of the failure of Buckhead City.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know yet, but I will let you know.
Okay. But in the meantime, I will talk a little bit more about some things that, well, let me tell you about it because I know I see some faces on this call that are interested in this. I want to talk about a couple of somewhat local things that didn't happen in the House. So for the second year, I introduced legislation on 2 public safety measures. One, a piece of legislation that would allow cities and counties that want to implement the use of noise detection, automatic noise detection camera devices to attempt to crack down on the street racing and the muffler noise that I know is keeping so many people up at night. I introduced it both as a bill that would just make it go into effect, and I also introduced it as a bill that would allow us to study the issue and decide if it was something that we wanted to do, because it is new technology. And so I could recognize if someone wanted to study it. Neither one of those bills got a hearing, but State Representative Deborah Silcox, who's now the only Republican member that represents any part of the city of Atlanta, she did introduce a study committee on the issue. And I do think that will end up moving, since it's a House study committee, it's not subject to crossover rules. So so that will be able to go later. And I do think that will move. So that's very exciting. And those that know me know I don't really care whose bill makes it. It's exactly the same bill, I think, as I introduced, but that's fine. Whatever moves, moves. So we'll look forward to that. And then, of course, I introduced again also the idea of having front-facing license plates that would provide a better tool for our law enforcement and the cameras that are around to pick up the bad actors. And so far, that has not moved either, which is disappointing. But I think that Senator Halpern has joined us. Hello, Senator. I've teed it up. I let him know you were doing double duty, and I said, I'm going to tell you what didn't happen in the House, but of course the biggest thing that didn't happen was the city of Buckhead City, but I'm going to let Senator Halpern tell you about that, because she had a front row seat to that masterpiece. So with that introduction, go for it.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Representative Evans. I am sorry to be late, everybody, but I am so glad to be with you now. I was rushing in from another conversation around these very same issues. So delighted to see all of you here today, and without delay, Buckhead City. So I will just tell you that there are some who are going to continue to believe that this was not the right outcome, but the implications for a Buckhead And so I do think this is a case in which the legislature got it right. So there were two bills this year. Both of those Atlanta don't represent Buckhead. So they were all from other delegations. They weren't necessarily even in Fulton County, all of them. And so that's unusual, right? Typically, when you're trying to do an incorporation of a city, the people who are signing on and saying, yes, this is the thing to do, are from the area that it would impact. Not the case in this scenario. SB 114. SB 114 would have allowed for the incorporation of a Buckhead City, and SB 113, interestingly enough, dealt with the transfer of assets in the case of a de-annexation and laid out what that would need to look like. Both of these were general bills. This particular session, I will be honest, it started this session, I might have even said it at our town hall, that it felt very much like Buckhead City wasn't really going to be something that moved, that it didn't seem to have as much steam. Last year, am I breaking up? Okay. Let's see if this is any better. I'm sorry. It's showing that
All right, I think Senator Halpern got frozen. We'll give her a chance to pop back on in a moment. There's a lot of folks on here I see from Ansley Park. I wanted to give you a quick update too on our fighting for the rest of the world, the rest of the state, to have notice when local transportation projects are done again. GDOT is now very well aware that we wanted to have public input on the roundabout that is being put in place around the Dewberry property. But obviously that could happen again. And so, as you all know, I introduced a bill that would require these public hearings regardless of who started the project, whether it was GDOT or an individual party. So I'm told that we're going to have a hearing on that. So I will keep you posted. I'm looking to see if there's legislation where we can add that language to still allow it to move before the session is over. But I'll start on education in the House. And I did see the question about the prosecutorial oversight, and very hot to trot about that. And if you didn't catch my remarks, you'll be able to see a clip in the newsletter this weekend. And so we will talk about that. But I did want to start with education. We did a couple of good things on the House side. First of all, the budget, the amended budget, and the proposed next year's budget, which we're actually voting on in the House tomorrow, fully funds the quality basic education formula, which is great. But of course, we need a new funding formula. We haven't written a new funding formula since Joe Frank Harris was governor, which was in the 80s. So it's about time that we updated that. But that is good news that we're going to add that money for education, which also includes some another $2,000 raise for our teachers in the fiscal year 2024. So that's in tomorrow's, what we're going to be voting on tomorrow. We also passed in the House Bill 249, which is it's a gap. Sorry, I was trying to find my word. It's a gap funding measure that is needs based, and Georgia is woefully behind on its needs based aid. But what we started this last year, allowing for students to get $2,500 grants if they were 80% finished with their college course. It would allow them to get a grant to finish. That worked really well, but we realized, of course, that there was more need. So we passed House Bill 249, which will say that you can get this needs-based gap funding bill if you are at least 70% finished. So it lowers the threshold of where you have to be in your course of study, or 45% finished with a 2-year program. And it also increases the amount that you can get from $2,500 to $3,500. So this will be a really big help, especially to in our technical college system. We also, this is huge. I think this is going to be the sleeper bill of the session that turns out to have the biggest impact on our state education wise. We passed House Bill 538, which is called the Georgia Early Literacy Act. And it requires the State Board of Education to use science-based literacy methods, which essentially means follow the science on how kids are reading, and a return back to more of a phonics-based curriculum as opposed to what's been going on, which is more of a guess the word. It's not been working. We have a very high number of students, particularly, I don't know particularly, but including here in APS, a very high number of students that are not reading. And if a child is not reading on grade level by 3rd grade, they're more likely to go to jail. They're more likely to drop out, all these bad things, because until 3rd grade, you're learning to read. And after 3rd grade, you're reading to learn. And so if you're not ready at 3rd grade, you're going to be behind and you're going to have a really hard time catching up. I don't know why we ever went away from what worked. We started chasing shiny objects. But this is going to be a great change, I believe, for our state. It's also shown that this type of reading curriculum is the best curriculum that you can use for students that have dyslexia. And so this way, even if you haven't caught the dyslexia, we're teaching the students the best way that there is. And it also happens to be the best way to teach students who don't have dyslexia. So this is huge. And I feel like it didn't get the fanfare. I wanted to stand up and throw a parade because I think this is a huge deal. And so I couldn't be more excited about this. And I'll be excited to see how those numbers of literacy change over the year. So Senator Halpern, are you back with us? Because I know folks want to know about the rest of the Buckhead story.
I think so. Can you hear me now? So sorry. Okay, I've moved. So Wi-Fi should be better. I don't know that you heard anything that I said, because from what I understand, I was going in and out. So I will just say that 2 bills were introduced in the Senate, neither of which were introduced by people who represent Atlanta nor Buckhead. And those bills this year did get some traction. And so they were both assigned to State and Local Government Oversight Committee. There were 2 hearings on the bills. And I think a very compelling case was made once again this year by those of us who were not for it, that the impact and the implications to the city to the residents of Buckhead in terms of taxes, to the children who are currently part of the North Atlanta cluster of schools, that there were just questions, remaining questions still and again on the legality of such a move, the practicality of it. How would this work? What about the bond debt? What about revenue debt? And then the constitutionality of it. So 2 hearings were given to these bills in SLOGO, and ultimately it was passed out of that committee. And then it came to the floor. Tomorrow will make a week ago. And so, kind of all along, we were really trying to make sure that we had the understanding of folks, particularly other folks who don't represent Atlanta, who are in the chamber, who now we're going to have the opportunity to vote as full body. The night before, and you might have heard this, the night before it was coming to the floor for a full vote, the executive council of the governor himself, his office, actually a memo was leaked that spelled out these same questions that we had been asking, have not gotten answers to. And ultimately, we came in the door on Thursday. We expected the vote to go the way it did, but I will tell you that it was a stressful day, and it has been a stressful few months, even just leading up to this vote, because you want to make sure that people have enough of the kind of information that they need to make an informed decision. And I will share with you that those of us who are in your City of Atlanta delegation, and I will shout out Representative Evans, I will shout out Representative Betsy Holland, who happens to chair the House side of the City of Atlanta delegation. On the Senate side, myself, Senator Jason Esteves, and Senator Josh McLaurin are the 3 senators that represent Buckhead. And we were doing a lot of work behind the scenes, along with the City of Atlanta and the mayor's office, to try to make sure that our colleagues were all informed about what the impact would be. And of course, I will tell you that your mayor, Andre Dickens, he has really done a great job over this first year in office with his relationships with people at the state. He has had availability to sit down and with anybody, beyond just the governor, beyond just the lieutenant governor, but any senator. And he himself has actually extended a hand to those folks to actually allow them to get to know him and to hear firsthand out of his mouth the things that he's been doing to address crime, public safety, public services, any of the concerns that were laid out by the folks who want to see a Buckhead city. And so ultimately, the good news, and you know the end of the story already, is that when it was brought to a vote on the floor after a 2-hour floor debate, where people stood up against it and people stood up for it, the votes were tallied, and there were 33 senators against and 23 for, thereby defeating the measure for the incorporation of the Buckhead city. It's important, I think it's very important to say that all of the Democrats in the Senate chamber voted no, along with 10 Republicans. So it was a bipartisan effort that ultimately defeated the bill. The Buckhead City movement folks at this point are, I think, acknowledging that it's not going to be something that will have any traction and move. At this point, I think in the note to their supporters, once the vote count had been had, I think that they specifically said that because of the executive council's memo coming out of the governor's office, that it's clear that this governor is not going to entertain this idea. And so they, I think, are going to continue to do the work that they want to do in order to see themselves be allowed to come to a vote on the issue. And I will tell you that we, those of us in the city, state lawmakers, all of those of us who make up leadership in our city, will also be working hard. And we will be working hard to continue to address the issues that were laid out. I think it's really important to say that although this is defeated, it does not mean that we have disregarded the challenges and the concerns. I mean, I think that there is validity to those concerns. And so it is incumbent upon us to continue to try to make positive change around those issues so that the people who want to see Buckhead separate won't have a reason to see it separate anymore. And I think I came in and Representative Evans was talking about the front license plates. I'm sure she's already mentioned the noise camera legislation that has been introduced. There is a study committee that I've introduced on the noise cameras and the technology around noise. One's been introduced in the Senate as in the House as well. I'm pretty confident that we're going to at least get a study committee on that. And so we'll continue to do the legislatively, the things that we need to do. We'll continue to do the things that we need to do in terms of getting in front of our neighbors and our neighborhoods and really understanding the issues and really working to try to solve the problems. And so for now, I think we can breathe a sigh of relief on Buckhead City. The one other thing that I do want to say about the bills is that 113, which didn't even come to the floor, it dealt with the transfer of assets when a de-annexation were to happen. And I think it's really important to mention that was a general bill that would have affected any other city across the state should it ever come to pass. And it literally spelled out things like how much the new city would get to buy assets like parks from the old city. And in the case of a Memorial Park and a Chastain Park, in the bill, it spelled out that those parks would need to be sold to Buckhead City at $100 an acre on the cheap, pennies on the dollar. It spelled out that 20% of the assets of the city would get transferred to the new city immediately. So there were huge implications to that piece of legislation that would have done damage not only to our city, but literally would have codified that kind of damage for any other city should other neighborhoods try to make the same kind of a move. So it's more than just, I mean, like I cannot overstate how important this vote was in terms of knocking this down for now and really protecting our state. I stood up and I made the point that Atlanta is not just the capital of our state, but it's also the capital city of the South. And so many other states around us would be just biting at the chomp for us to break apart our capital city because they compete against us. North Carolina competes against us. Alabama competes against us. Florida competes against us for business. And as the #1 state in the country in which to do business, and we've had a very robust economic development successes. I mean, those states would love to see us do something that would allow us to stumble and allow them to capitalize on that mistake. So that's kind of the long and short of it. I think for now we can breathe a sigh of relief, but it was really a joint effort amongst a lot of different people. And I didn't even say grassroots organizations, our Neighbors for United Atlanta, Committee for United Atlanta, business, the business community, including the Metro Atlanta Chamber. I mean, the Buckhead Coalition, the Buckhead CID, Midtown Alliance wrote a letter in opposition to the de-annexation. The Council for Quality Growth wrote a letter in opposition to the de-annexation. There were quite a number of organizations, people, grassroots organizations that were really eyeing the situation and very much on the side to keep our city united. Yeah. So thank you to any of you who might have advocated for the end result that we got.
Yeah, it was really amazing to watch. Incredible, and glad that we don't get to go through the same thing on the House side, at least not this year. So kudos over there on the Senate side. Senator Halpern, I talked a little bit about a couple of education bills that passed in the House. I don't know if you have a couple from the Senate before we move on to another.
I do. I do. So right before I talked about Buckhead, you were talking about literacy, and I just want to mirror that in the Senate, in the education and youth and higher ed, in the Senate, we have had a big focus also on literacy because it has been one of the priorities of the majority caucus this session. We passed a bill, and I'm going to say I don't think I have the number in front of me. So I'll tell it to you in a moment. But we passed a bill, and it basically would establish a literacy commission. We also are, just like the House, concerned about the kind of evidence-based practice of learning how to read and literacy and the approach that needs to be taken, and ultimately looking for some consistency, I think, across all of the different school districts in the state. Right now, we have a number of school districts that are doing it exceedingly well and others that are struggling. And so where we can take best practices and actually make that the model for everybody across the state, that's kind of where we're looking to go with it. And I want to say that I think that there's a really big understanding in the Georgia General Assembly that the steps that we're taking this year, both on the House side and the Senate side, I have a lot of confidence that both of those are going to pass and get to the governor's desk. I think it's really important to share that it is by no means the end of the work that we have to do. It is the beginning of the work. It's the beginning of the vision setting. It's the beginning of the making it a commitment, and I mean across administrations through time, in order to be able to see the changes that we need to see. This is urgent, I think, for our state, and it is being discussed as urgent for our state because ultimately it is a workforce issue. We need to make sure that we've got well-trained, well-educated workers for all these businesses that are coming in. I mean, there's that economic development part of it. And then of course we want, and we should want, every citizen to be able to reach their full potential. And that is curbed greatly when you can't read on grade level by third grade and then fifth grade, which are kind of the two markers that we had started to look at in the Senate. So we did a commission bill. You know, a lot of people will be disappointed that we're not taking it further, but the good news really is that we're taking a serious effort and a stab at saying that this is critically important and we got to do something. I have a couple of other bills in education. Did you talk about any of your other education bills already that are making it?
Yes, go for it. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, there's a couple, but the one that I would want to talk about, there's two that I want to talk about if I can. One is another voucher bill. It's SB 233. It is known as the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act. It is a voucher bill. Every single session, we are seeing bills brought forward that effectively are trying to take dollars out of our public school education and really giving them to parents and or giving them to private schools. So the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act delineates $6,000 that parents that are portable dollars, basically, that a family can use towards private school. $6,000 is the average dollar amount that the state contributes to our children's education. That is an average. In your older grades, that number is actually higher, and in your lower grades, kindergarten, first grade, the number is actually lower. This bill would allow you to take the $6,000 and use it towards a school of your choice, as long as your child has been in a public school for, it's not even 6 weeks. So you just have to put your kid in public school for a short time, and then you can take the $6,000 and change schools and allow them to go to a private school. In addition to the fact that there is no fiscal note on this, and so we really do not know the fiscal implications of it, what we do know is that in so many of our counties, there aren't even private schools. So when we think about our rural counties and our rural students, and we can think about our metro ones too, I mean, ultimately, this is not giving the kind of choice to parents and families that that we're often hearing is the reason and the rationale for a bill like this. But it will have an impact on our schools. It will have an impact on it'll have an impact on the schools. So that's one that I wanted to mention. Another one that got a lot of attention, SB 88, did also make it across chambers to the House. This is called the Parents and Children Protection Act of 2023. It really is a transgender, anti-transgender bill. And so, actually, no, let me stop. This is not the one that made it across. This is the one that actually got tabled in the Senate Education and Youth in the Youth Committee. In an amazing show of unison, those of us who were against this bill, and this bill basically would not have allowed students to talk to teachers about gender or sexual identity without parents' written consent. In an amazing show of unity, the Georgia Southern Baptists ended up against and opposed to the improvements that were made to this bill after the author had worked with some of the advocacy groups. And so anyway, that bill got tabled in the Senate, so that's not alive. It didn't pass. And that was a little bit of a victory that day. We take them. I mean, ultimately, it was a 9-1 vote to table. The chair of the Minority Caucus, Elena Parent, she and I both sit in the Education Committee. She made the motion to table. I seconded it. And by the time we voted it out, that did not move across the aisle and it didn't get out of committee. So that's that on education for me. I'll toss back to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love we have to appreciate the losses that are wins and the wins that are incremental. That's how we get to where we want to get. So that's great. You reminded me though, Senator, that we had a voucher bill too, but it was tucked into a bill, a larger bill that dealt with increasing the tax credits that you can get for contributions to rural hospitals, House Bill 101. They tacked in a increase for the student scholarship organizations, raising that cap from 120 million a year to 130 million a year. So I voted against that bill, but that did make it over, so that'll be coming over to the Senate. And for those on the
Uh-oh.
I know, it looks like she froze this time.
Equal opportunity.
Yeah.
Well,
My battery's running.
while we, oh, is this her coming back?
I think so. I think that was or coming under mine, maybe. Yeah.
Well, while we wait, I'm going to stay on the topic of education since we're here, and we'll let Representative Evans come back on. We did pass another bill, SB 32, that would require school districts, local education agencies to implement a mobile panic alert system that would be able to connect to kind of disparate emergency services in the case of an emergency, in the event of a school emergency. So it needed to connect to local first responder agencies and do some coordination between multiple states. There's a lot of different kind of scenarios that could happen where that would be useful, including, you know, in school shootings or intruder alerts or medical emergencies, as a matter of fact. This bill does not require a school district that already has a system in place to change their system, but it really does require, I think by the end of next year, for school districts to figure out what system that they will use in order to satisfy this new bill. We'll see if it gets all the way through, but this was one of the ones that I was happy to vote for. We heard a bill just yesterday, so it didn't make crossover. Actually, it did. It crossed over from the House to the Senate that we heard just yesterday, School Safety Act, and it would also require schools to have intruder drills. It doesn't qualify how many they have to have over the course of a school year, but it would require them to have at least one intruder drill, and also for administrators and or faculty themselves to be able to have training around gangs and being able to better recognize gang activity in order that they can get ahead of some of the things that we're seeing in some of the schools across our state. There is separately going to be a $50,000, I think it's $50,000 or $60,000 appropriation for every single school across the state for school safety, kind of the general bucket of school safety, and schools can determine for themselves how they want to use those dollars. And so, you know, these intruder drills, the panic system, I mean, those are examples of how they might take some of that money. We know that there's a wide disparity between schools and the physical buildings themselves. Some are brand new, some are older. And so kind of the security needs from school to school may be different, but we've left it up to the local administrators to figure out the best way for them to spend those grant dollars that every single school will be receiving out of this 2024 appropriation budget. No Rep Evans yet, huh?
I'm back. I made it.
You are back. Okay.
Sorry, I'm afraid, Senator, that we're cursed tonight with our my computer shut down. So I'm now coming to you from my phone. We'll figure out what's going on with that. But I was just telling y'all about House Bill 101, where they snuck in a voucher bill. And I just wanted to say, for those of you that go and look at the vote count, that maybe notice there were a few more Democrats that voted for this than you would normally see. And if you feel surprised by that, just know that I know some of our legislators from more rural parts of the state were really torn because the increase in the rural healthcare tax credit was in the same bill. And I think that was by design. But in any event, that bill did cross over. So I know that we had some interest in the prosecutorial oversight bill. So I know I had Kennedy will be mad at me because we were going to go to health, but I'll touch on some of the judiciary related bills that passed in the House, starting with that the Prosecuting Attorneys Oversight Commission, which in the House was House Bill 231. I think there's a Senate version as well. This is something that first popped up last year, and it passed the House and then got defeated in the Senate. But it's back, and I know a version has now passed the House and the Senate, and it's very, I find it extremely frustrating because I believe so much in prosecutorial oversight, and what this bill would do would set up a commission to oversee district attorneys and decide if they need discipline, if they need to be removed from office, if they need to be involuntary retired. If this commission determines that they are not doing their job the way that this commission thinks that they should be doing it, it's been a reaction to, I believe, a lot of Democratic DAs, particularly African-American DAs being elected across the state, and folks don't like how they're doing their jobs. And to me, prosecutorial oversight is what it is. It's prosecutorial discretion. I'm sorry, oversight, prosecutorial discretion. The DAs get to decide what they're going to prosecute, where they're going to put the energy and time and money, all the resources of their office. They certainly can't do everything. I made a point of saying, adultery is still technically illegal in this state. Are we going to be removing DAs because they're not prosecuting folks for adultery? That's maybe a silly example, But that's the thing, you either have prosecutorial discretion or you don't. And if you start picking and choosing when you think folks are exercising it correctly, I think you're asking for trouble, and you're also trampling all over democracy, because district attorneys are elected. And we need to trust the voters to elect their DAs. And are all DAs perfect? Of course they're not. But the voters can decide when the DAs are acting badly and remove them. That's what happened to the DA down in Brunswick, who mishandled, to say the least, the Ahmaud Arbery case. So I think that we need to trust the voters. But it's been a busy judiciary-related session in the House. A couple of things I'll touch on before tossing it back to Senator Halpern. We passed a bill I'm very excited about, House Bill 264, which will create a wrongful conviction compensation review panel. Right now in Georgia, if you're wrongfully convicted and you are exonerated, you have a chance to have compensation for the time that you were wrongfully incarcerated. Obviously, there's no amount of money that can give you back those years, but at least it's a recognition that the state made a mistake, and that you should have never been in jail, and at least some money as you try to put your life back together after that terrible situation. A lot of states have, so right now you have to come as an individual, get a representative and introduce a bill for you, an individual compensation bill that has to go through all the legislative process and get signed by the governor. A lot of states do this by commission, where you don't have these individual bills every time. And so what House Bill 364 does is create such a commission for Georgia so that we don't have to do the individual bills like we do now. And Scott Holcomb has been working on this for many years, and that's his bill. But in the meantime, we still have to keep doing these wrongful conviction compensation bills the old-fashioned way. So I actually have two that are that have passed the House that'll be coming over to the Senate to seeks to compensate two individuals who were wrongfully convicted and were exonerated. They were the first cases cleared by the Fulton wrongful conviction integrity unit. So that's pretty exciting. We'll see, look forward to those going across. We also passed House Bill 462, Raise the Age Act. This will change the jurisdiction of juvenile court to include certain children, not every offense that a child under 17 that are 17 or younger commits, but most. And so this is exciting because 17-year-olds certainly do not need to be, where possible, do not need to be in our adult prison system. So that's very exciting. And then I want to talk about House Bill 404. It's sort of judiciary, but I'm going to have to squeeze it in here. So House Bill 404 is a renter protection bill. It's amazing to me, but until this bill, if it passes all the way through, Georgia has never had a requirement that if you're renting property to someone to live in, that you warrant that it is fit for human habitation. Georgia right now does not have that warrant of habitability. Most states do, we do not. So House Bill 404 creates that here in Georgia. So if you're going to rent to someone, you're making an implied promise that the place is fit for human habitations, which means the water needs to work, the air, the heat. You don't need to have bug infestations. And sadly, I'm sure many of y'all saw the deep dive that the AJC did over the last few months, exposing that we've got a lot of properties across the state and especially in Atlanta and metro counties that really are not fit for human habitation. And these landlords or slumlords have been getting by with this for way too long. The bill also caps the amount that you can charge for a security deposit to no more than the equivalent of 2 months rent. And it also, for the first time, provides the ability for a renter to cure a default. So if the renter's behind on rent right now, there is no grace period required by law. The landlord can start the eviction process right away. House Bill 404 puts in a 3 business day right to cure. Obviously, a lot of us wanted more, but this was at least a start because right now it's 0. And so at least this will set up a 3 business day right to cure, which is a big step for Georgia. So those are a couple of judiciary related things that we did in the House. Toss it back to you, Senator.
Can I talk a little bit about public safety, criminal justice, and some of the bills that came through this year that will be coming over to the House? SB 36 is a pimping and pandering bill. That one long passed from earlier in the session. You all may have already started to deal with that one. That one just increases penalties. I mean, I'm going to tell you that one of the things that has happened this session is in the effort to fight crime, which we all want to do. But in the effort to do that, many of the bills that have been coming out of the Senate have all really got increased mandatory, have mandatory minimums, or have increased the floor for what that mandatory minimum will be. And so the pimping and pandering bill does the same thing. It makes the first offense a felony, and it ratchets it up. Last year, we actually had a pimping and pandering bill, and it raised the misdemeanor level. I think it was high and aggravated misdemeanor. Now, anyway, it's a penalty. It's a felony from the beginning, even the first offense. So that's one of the bills to take a look at, and we'll see what happens. We passed a bill on street gang terrorism and prevention. Again, it raises mandatory minimum penalties for violations of the Street Gang and Terrorism Prevention Act. We have a bill that's now sitting in the House. It's SB 68, and it's all about cash bail, and it changes Georgia law from 7 crimes, and they are serious crimes, but it increases the number of crimes which would be bail restricted, meaning that a judge has to set bail in order for a person to get out. So we increased it from 7 crimes to 60 crimes. It added 53 crimes to the list that would require cash bail. And many of those 53 that they added, my family's screaming in the background, 53 that they added are misdemeanors, simple things. And, you know, this raise the age bill that Rep. Evans just mentioned is really key, even connected to this cash bail one, because imagine that you've got a 17-year-old, for example, who is arrested for being in a fray, and a fray would be something like a fist fight. And so that child, well, although by Georgia law, right, they're considered adults. You can have young people who will be sitting in jail and not in going through juvenile court, and who will have to post bail for simple things. I mean, I'm not saying kids should be in fist fights, but I'm just saying there are so many misdemeanors that they have in that list. And so it's a huge expansion. The concern, of course, is my concern, of course, is how do you take a balanced approach? We do need to let folks know that there are consequences to committing illegal acts and doing crime. And at the same time, how do we make sure that we're not stripping away the progress, the bipartisan progress too, by the way, that we have made over these last several years as it relates to our criminal justice system. I don't know that we're really striking the right balance this particular session, but those are some of the bills that are now sitting over in the House that they will have to contend with.
Yeah, lots of crime stuff coming our way. We'll be ready. Briefly on health, we did a couple of things in the House on the healthcare side. As y'all know, last year we made a big step forward by passing a comprehensive mental health bill. And like anything that big, there's always going to be things that you realize that you needed to do that you didn't put in there originally. And I'm sure that will continue to be true as this goes along. But another great bipartisan win for us was House Bill 520, which does a lot of things, but the 2 key points that I'll talk about is one is that it sets up a student loan forgiveness program for those that go into mental health services to try to encourage more providers, because that is one of the problems with providing mental health services in our state is the lack of providers. And so hopefully this will get some more folks into the pipeline. It will take some time, but we got to start somewhere. And then also it sets up a system for data sharing among all the agencies, healthcare agencies and DFACs and all the social services organizations. Right now, there's a lot of artificial walls that are up. Obviously, there are HIPAA and other privacy concerns that are at play here. So we want to be delicate, but we also don't want to tie the hands of these agencies to work together for the betterment of everyone. So that bill is headed to the Senate, and that's exciting. A bill that we passed also on the House side that I actually voted against, House Bill 557. And I recognize this is a hard one. But what this does is it authorizes doctors to delegate more authority to advanced practice registered nurses to prescribe opiates. And this was set forth as something that we needed to help, particularly in rural areas where there are not as many medical doctors, but there are more nurse practitioners, that we want to be able to have the ability for these prescriptions to be written. But I also know that we still are having an opioid crisis. And Georgia is one of the hardest hit places for that. Folks are getting addicted to opioids. And so I ended up voting against this bill for that reason. I don't want more folks, particularly those that haven't spent as much time in school, prescribing opioids. I also tend to think that we need to move away from opioids generally. There are other ways to manage pain. And I've heard from many, and when this debate was going on, that there's really nothing better at killing the pain than an opioid, particularly with dental surgery or a major surgery. And I get all that, but there are other options that aren't as addictive. And we know that there are big problems with opioids. So I did end up voting against that bill, but it is headed to the Senate. And I suspect will pass House Bill 557. I think the aim is good. I understand it. But for me, it was a no because of the opioids. Did y'all do any health related bills over in the Senate, Senator? I don't remember hearing anything.
We did. I am going to talk about a couple. We did one bill having to do with the glucose monitors, which really is kind of a Medicaid expansion bill. And so it allows for people who need glucose monitors. It expands Medicaid to cover glucose monitors, and it allows people to get the better pricing on that, understanding that long-term people can better manage their diabetes if they have access to these devices and can use them directly at home. So it is a pharmacy benefit now for Medicaid recipients. So that's good news there. We also passed a bill, SB 76, that's on its way to the House, that would be a cap for state employees on their insulin costs. And I believe that is $35. $35. So anybody who is part of the state health benefit plan would be able to get their insulin for a much reduced cost. Separately, we did also, have we heard that yet? What's coming is a study committee also on this idea of everybody across the state having that same insulin cap, and figuring out how to do that, and figuring out, in fact, could the state actually produce its own insulin in order to be able to offer it to Georgians. There are some states that actually are starting to look at manufacturing insulin themselves. And so there's a study committee that has been proposed that would allow Georgia to also see the efficacy or the is that really an option for our state also. We passed a bill, the Surprise Billing Consumer Protection Act, SB 20, to ensure consumer access to quality healthcare by setting adequacy standards for network plans. Just people should know what to expect and should not be receiving bills that surprise them and that all of a sudden put them in, real financial bind. And then SB 140. SB 140 was one of those bills that on crossover day was, we had a few fights in us and SB 140 was one of those bills that we knew if it got called to the floor was going to be one. And this is the bill dealing with gender dysphoria. So this bill did pass, and ultimately this bill would not allow minors who are experiencing gender dysphoria to have surgery as a minor, no gender reassignment surgeries, and it also prevents them from having hormone therapy. The one thing that it does allow would be puberty blockers, and that's it. So effectively, it is a bill that gets between families, parents with their children, and doctors in making decisions about children who are experiencing gender dysphoria. That one is making its way to the, I mean, that one is in the House. And it'll be interesting to see if it changes at all there. But we did have a pretty robust floor debate and a pretty robust discussion around the damage that puberty blockers alone can do to children who are experiencing dysphoria. It's definitely one of those culture war issues, and we haven't had very many of them this session. It has definitely felt like other sessions have been all about the culture wars, but this bill, and then of course the one that did get tabled, and education that we talked about earlier, those have really been two of the bills specifically kind of targeting transgender youth. So those are a few of the things that we've looked at in health.
Yeah, we'll be looking for that one. That'll be a fight. We're muscled up and ready for that. You know, I tend to think that the House, well, first of all, I agree with Senator Halpern that the culture war bills have been much lower this year than particularly last year. I felt like it was a constant barrage last year. Of course, it was an election year, so that may explain some of it. But even last year when it felt like we were having the culture wars, the House did not have as much of an appetite, it felt like, on the anti-transgendered bills. But of course, the banning transgendered girls from sports came to the House at the last second. And so I'll be very curious to see if they try such a cowardly approach on this piece of legislation, or whether they will do it earlier in the day or in the session so that we can actually wage a full war. Of course, I would rather just not ever come out of the committee that it gets assigned to. So we'll see where that goes. I know it's almost time for questions. So if you haven't put your questions in the chat, make sure to do that. And Kennedy will go through those in just a little bit. I wanted to make sure to mention a bill related to transportation that passed in the House Bill 189, which raises the weight that trucks are allowed to be on our state highways. Of course, what goes on the interstate system is regulated by the feds, so we can't touch that. But House Bill 189 raised the weight for trucks on state highways from 80,000 pounds to 88,000 pounds. Now, that was originally going to be upwards of 90, and it was going to apply across the board. So it did get a little bit better. This bill, again, is 88,000 pounds, and it's limited to logs, timber, concrete, and solid waste. I voted no on this bill. The Georgia Department of Transportation was very much opposed to the bill, saying that our roads and bridges are not ready for this extra weight. And we all know the wear and tear that we see on our roads. And of course, the city of Atlanta has its fair share of state highways: Peachtree, Ponce, Piedmont, Ralph David Abernathy. We've got a lot of roads where this could apply. And maybe we don't see a lot of timber coming through. We could very well see some of that, but we could also see the increased weight in trucks carrying solid waste and concrete. So that was a very close vote. It takes 91 votes to pass. This one got 93. So it barely passed, and it was one of the last bills that we did headed into crossover. Senator, any other bills you want to mention? And then Kennedy, if not, Kennedy could queue up the questions for it.
Well, I'll continue the discussion you had around the House bill that passed. There was a similar bill in the Senate that didn't end up getting traction, but it did exactly the same thing. It contemplated raising the amount of pounds that trucks could have on our roads. I think the interesting part of this conversation is ultimately leads us to a full understanding that we actually need higher dollar investments in our roads and in our bridges, because the other part of the challenge, and I think part of the reason for the sponsors who actually introduced these bills, is they recognize that our Georgia producers and manufacturers are sometimes at a disadvantage. If you look at some of the other surrounding states around us, they're able to carry heavier loads. And we do want to make sure that our Georgia producers, Georgia products can actually move quickly and get distributed quickly, and that we're supporting our manufacturers. And so how do you do that if you are being told that, we really can't increase weights, but other places actually have the capability to do that? You just want to make sure, we do need to make sure that Georgians are not at a disadvantage due to this. And if it's a matter of investment, because ultimately GDOT really made a very effective case that, the wear and tear on our roads by allowing heavier trucks would deteriorate the roads so much more quickly that it would cost us a lot of money. At the very least, and I don't know what'll happen with the bill in the Senate, but at the very least, I think it opened up an important conversation about investment in our roadways, and making sure that we actually are also, not putting our Georgia businesses at a disadvantage. Let's see. I'm looking to see, Kennedy,
Are we ready for
maybe we can
questions?
start at the top for questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so the very first question wanted you to speak about Senate Bill 221, the one about the language that must be used on absentee ballot applications.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you, and what I will say, is this bill did not make it to the full Senate. And so it did not pass into the House. Here's the interesting thing about these election bills. I would love to actually send everybody a follow-up email on this particular one in a week, because next Thursday in ethics, which is the committee that is going to hear any election related bill, it is my strong sense that we are getting ready to do something around elections again. Why do I think that? I had a bill, SB 101. SB 101 was a very simple bill, and it strictly would have triggered an automatic mailing of an absentee ballot in a runoff if anybody had requested it in a primary election or a general. Right now, today, only if you're a senior will you automatically be mailed an absentee ballot once you've requested one. I think that we should allow that for everybody. My bill, I just found out today, is getting heard next Thursday at 8 a.m. So now I'm suspicious. I mean, it certainly can't go anywhere this year, but it does tell me that they are looking to do something, and it wouldn't surprise me if they find some way to take some of my language and add it into an omnibus bill that will end up dealing with elections. I'm not sure, I'll be honest and tell you, I'm not sure if this is the bill, but but I think it may be. There was a bill that was heard in the ethics committee about a week and a half ago or so. This one never made it to the full floor. So this one's not crossed over. This one's not really moving this year. But what they did is, in the kind of final moments of that meeting, they actually eliminated drop boxes altogether. So there is something afoot around elections, and there does seem to be an interest in the majority party of continuing to kind of massage what already exists as it relates to how we're voting, ballots, because literally my bill had nothing. My bill literally added like 2 sentences into current law that just would automatically trigger the mailing. This one, 221, requires that anybody who is undertaking any election related duties must be a citizen of the United States, not just a citizen, a judicious, intelligent, and upright citizen of the United States. I think that I'm going to have more to say about this bill and other ones after next week, but I do think something's afoot.
Yeah, I think something's up. And I saw a question in the chat about House Bill 200, which House Bill 200 was a bill that I had co-sponsored to allow local governments, cities, to allow cities that wanted to. You don't have to, but if you want to have ranked choice voting, you can. And obviously that eliminates runoffs, which are very expensive for everyone, but particularly for cities, and they tend to have the most runoffs. And so that's why the bill was aimed at them. It was thought to be the best chance that we had for a ranked choice voting bill this year. So that's why it was introduced the way it was. It did have a hearing right before crossover day, like the Friday before, Thursday before, but it didn't have a vote. And of course it didn't get through the House floor. But to the senator's point, they did hear it. And if they're going to hear your bill, and I know they also heard some bills from a new state rep, Syra Draper, who used to be the Democratic Party of Georgia's voter protection director. She's an amazing addition to the City of Atlanta delegation and the House generally. So excited to have her. But she had a bill that would allow parents of children under 5 or 6, I can't remember, to go to the front of the line, just like we allow those that are over, I think, 75 to go to the front of the line. And it was bipartisan and seemed to be popular. And so I just don't know why they would hear all of these bills, but not move any of them if they weren't planning anything. And I'm sure there's some bill that did cross over that they could strip or add all of these things to. So I think that's right. I think we should look at it. Related to the issue of runoffs, but not ranked choice voting specifically, there was legislation introduced to take Georgia back to being a 45% state. A lot of folks don't realize that you used to just have to get 45% of the vote to win an election and avoid a runoff in Georgia. And this is another one that I know Representative Draper is supportive of. And she did a study that found out that I think it was all but 2 of the runoffs that we've had in the last many, many decades would have turned out the same with the 45% rule, and of course avoided the expensive runoffs. These are statewide runoffs, of course, not, I don't know about local ones. But I don't believe that got a hearing. But the point is there's a lot of election stuff floating out. I know on both sides of the aisle, there's been consternation, heartburn, whatever you want to call it, about these ballot challenges. The omnibus bill that was passed last session allows private citizens to raise challenge to someone else's ballot, and the local election boards have to deal with that. And I know from talking with Fulton County, it's a very onerous process. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of time. And 99 point whatever % of the time, it's frivolous and nothing comes of it. So it's a lot of time spent for not a lot of protection for voters. So I know that there was some desire to maybe do something about that. So maybe something is coming.
Yeah, we are one of only 2 states, I think, in the nation who really have runoffs at this point. So we are in the far minority in terms of how other states at this point have chosen and elected to deal with their election process.
That's right. And it's costing a lot of money. Yeah. Kennedy, what other questions are out there?
Yeah, we got a few more. I think this would be best for Senator Halpern. It's about the Georgia rental bill that was in the House, but they're just asking, they said, as Rep. Evans said, the right to cure at 3 business days is an improvement, but advocates are still pushing for 7. Is there any chance for making these changes in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, we will always in the Senate try to improve bills that come our way. And so trying to think of which committee that will be heard in. I know it won't be my committee, any of the committees I sit on. I don't know what committee that will be assigned. I'm going to come back and tell you what committee, if it's already been assigned, because it should be already. But we will always do our best to actually improve bills, whether or not any of the motions that we make to amend actually pass. We'll have to kind of see. It's hard for me to tell exactly what the appetite would be of my colleagues. I think we'll have to see. I don't know. But you can always count on us. I'm making the amendments. You can always count on us of bringing up the discussion. You can always know that so we always love to have advocates come and actually speak at hearings so that we can hear directly from them. But we also love to actually get those talking points ourselves directly from advocates so that we as members can speak, because we know for sure that as members generally, we will be given the respect of being able to ask more than just one question and make multiple points, even if time does not allow for everybody who signs up to speak in the hearing to actually speak. We generally are given the privilege to be able to say what we need to say.
Yep, and just know on the House side, the bill was in judiciary, and it looks like it's going to the judiciary in the Senate as well. We had a 3-hour plus hearing, and the warrant of habitability, we wanted a definition, of course, but that was not something we were able to get onto the bill. And I've talked to some folks, in the legal aid world, and I believe that since we don't have a definition, the courts are naturally going to look to states that do for some guidance. But I think at the very least, water, heat, air, no infestations, no mold, it's going to be really hard to say that those things are not part of habitability. So while it would have been nice to have a definition, I mean, I would like for us to adopt the uniform landlord tenant law like a lot of other states have done. But do know that we fought hard, and it is sausage. They call it making sausage for a reason. Like, for example, the warrant of habitability used to, when the first draft came, it had a way for that to be waived. If you were signing a long-term lease, we got that taken out. Originally, the cap on security deposits was 3 months. We got that pushed down to 2. And originally there was a 3-day right to cure, and we got that to 3 business days. I know these sound like small wins, but they actually are huge, because what you're up against when you're trying to pass such big legislation like this, and no excuse for us not doing it all the way, believe me, but I want us to get something across the line. And so that's why you see us voting for things that aren't perfect, because we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And if we were to get all of the things in the legislation that we wanted, we're up against a very strong landlord lobby that would work day and night to kill it, and then we would get nothing. These small concessions that we make here and there are to tamp down the opposition in the hallway, which, make no mistake, could kill this. And so I do hope that, and I believe that there are some additional improvements that could be made in the Senate, but do know that we're working hard and trying to strike a balance to get improvement in an area that's had no improvements for far too long. And folks are really living in just conditions that are horrid. And this is going to give legal advocates a lot of tools to work with that they have not at all today. So it really is exciting.
Great, thanks, guys. I have another question for Senator Halpern, asking to hear your thoughts on Senate Bill 62, which passed in the Senate, related to unsheltered homelessness.
Yes. Okay. This one, I believe, ultimately, when it passed, so this is a bill about unsheltered homelessness. So last year, a bill was introduced that basically, would have made it illegal to be homeless. It would have penalized cities that have growing numbers of homeless by not allowing them to receive state funding. It was very, very punitive. Ultimately, a study committee was done over the interim period in 2022, and coming out of that, we see this particular bill. This bill had its challenges as well. This bill initially, I think, was trying to create encampments, actual encampments on state property. And it disregarded what we know about encampments and what we've seen in other states, other cities, when those, kind of are allowed to prosper. What happens in terms of drug use, what happens in terms of other things. It didn't contemplate at all things like restrooms. It just didn't contemplate the things that you would actually want to make sure that your unsheltered have, which is a safe place to go home, not an encampment on a state property. I believe that at the end of all of the amendments and changes, I believe that ultimately what we passed was a bill that just said if a city has any ordinances, they must enforce them. I think that is what we came to when it was all said and done. I could be wrong, because I will be honest, this is one of those bills that went on crossover day, and on crossover day, we actually dealt with like 65 bills. But I think this is one of the ones that actually did get improved as time went on, and ultimately passed in a much better position than it was when it first got to us. I'm gonna just check one thing. If there's another question, this is Senate Bill 62, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, this bill ultimately passed with the majority of your senators voting for it. So in its final form, it ended up being something that most of us could get behind. We were 49 yeses to 7 noes, and I was one of the yeses as well.
We still have a few questions revolving the DA oversight bill. Wanting to know, is it a done deal since there's one in the House, one in the Senate, the governor's for it? Also just wanting to know about the Fannie Willis investigation and just details about that, if there's any way of blocking it.
So I think that it's definitely not over till it's over. And last year, everybody thought this prosecutorial oversight commission was going to pass, and it was killed in the Senate. So I think, especially when you have two different bills, obviously the House, we could pass the Senate version clean and then it would be over, or the Senate could pass our version clean and then it would be over. But I find it hard to believe that they would both go unchanged in some way, because there are reasons that the House wanted, the leaders that wanted this on the House side. There are reasons that they put in what they did, and the same thing on the Senate. So egos get in the way here. So I have a hard time believing that they won't change. And so when that happens, that sets up a situation where you could end up with a conference committee. And anytime you do that, you start racing up against the clock to get that done before sine die on day 40. So certainly there's still a chance here. I know that there's still a lot of calls coming in to all parties on this. And the national narrative on this bill, to the extent there's been one, and there has, because let's face it, Georgia, we are national. We've been national for a while, particularly when it comes to justice issues and voting issues. But on this issue, it certainly made a little bit of national news too. And folks have said, oh, this is a reaction to Fulton District Attorney Fannie Willis's special grand jury. And the answer to that is absolutely not. And, God bless the national media, but come and talk to some people on the ground. And whatever the reason for the prosecutorial oversight bill is not good, but it has nothing to do with Fannie Willis. Again, this was an effort that was started last year before the grand jury was in anybody's eye. But it really has been a reaction to DAs being elected who have different philosophies than those DAs that came before them as far as which crimes to prosecute, and which ones to spend time prosecuting and which ones not. You saw a lot of Democratic DAs over the last couple of years come out and speak very publicly about the fact that they were not going to be prosecuting doctors, not going to be prosecuting women that chose to administer abortion services or to seek abortion services. And that really is what started this, is that, you know, there were folks out there that said, well, you can't make these blanket statements that you're not going to prosecute XYZ crimes. You saw some DAs announcing or even not announcing, but just not prosecuting as many marijuana related crimes. And some people just don't like that on the Republican side. And they started coming after this idea of a prosecutorial oversight commission. We did hear some debate on crossover day, which was a little bit funny to me, on the Republican side, that, oh, this is not about Democratic DAs. This is just about misbehaving DAs, and they're on both sides. And they were pointing to this one example that they seem to be able to come up with of this one DA that they wanted to talk about, I believe from Paulding County, who had had some misdeeds, so to speak, in office. But it actually proved the point that we don't need a DA oversight commission, that there's already a system in place. The state bar regulates DAs. The Attorney General's office can bring criminal charges against DAs that are not doing what they're supposed to do. The governor can remove DAs for certain offenses. And for this particular situation, and sorry for going in the weeds on this, but it's offensive to me that we're going to attack prosecutorial discretion because certain members of the Republican leadership don't like who got jobs in certain counties. But the situation in Paulding, the Attorney General could have prosecuted that DA and had him removed from office pretty quickly. But our Attorney General chose not to stand in his power and not to do anything. Ultimately, the governor did step in and that DA was removed from office. So the system works. We don't need this extra layer of government, more money, more eyes over an elected official at the end of the day. So that's a long way of saying that had nothing to do with Fani Willis, or at least had nothing to do with the special grand jury investigation in Trump. And yes, there is still a chance to kill it. But, you know, we'll have to see. There are some folks that seem really, really intent on having this.
Right, yeah, I know.
Can I?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I know we're coming at the end of our time, but can I mention one other topic that I don't think that we've hit at all yet that might be of interest to folks, and that is online sports betting. So, you know, there's always every single session this feeling and this sense like, will this be the year in which Georgia gets online sports betting, or that Georgia gets casinos? The short answer is no, this will not be the year. We had two bills in the Senate that had to do with online sports betting. One of them had online sports betting and horse racing, and it did not, it failed on the Senate floor. We had a separate bill that had to do with just online sports betting and a constitutional amendment. You know, there was Justice Melton had written, I don't know what to call it, but he had written his thoughts that to do online sports betting would not require a constitutional amendment, where it's a ballot referendum where every single person gets to vote yes or no on whether or not that we should have it. So one bill did not include the constitutional amendment. It went based off of, you know, his thoughts on these kinds of games of luck, skill or luck. The other one assumed that no, we would have to have a constitutional amendment, and it did not include the horse racing. It only included the online sports betting. It did try to provide for dollars for needs-based scholarships for students. It indicated some dollars maybe that could go to rural healthcare, rural broadband and healthcare. In any case, neither one of those bills were able to successfully get out of the Senate, off of the Senate floor. Both of them failed in larger numbers than I had anticipated, quite frankly. And so there is a lot of work, I would say, to be done yet within the Georgia General Assembly, and certainly in the Senate, because there are different factions who really are not coming together on the why we should expand our gaming to online sports betting, the advantage of it or not, and what to do with the money or not if we were to do it. So there's a lot of different competing ideologies all happening, but ultimately neither one of those passed in the Senate. I know that there was a bill in the House. Rep. Evans can speak to that, but I think effectively nothing's happening. We are not expanding gaming beyond our lottery at this point.
Yeah, it's very sad for us to miss out on those dollars. We are coming to the end of our time, but I did see a question about HR 18, which is the independent redistricting bill that was introduced that I've supported for a number of years. No hearing and no surprise. I mean, this is one of those things where the party in power has to put down their power to ever agree to independent redistricting. And I definitely don't see it, but it was something that several of us, we want to keep the conversation going. And so that's why it's introduced, but that did not move and I wouldn't expect it to move. And then there was a question about House Bill 215, which set up a couple of new health positions that have to be certified, nurse midwife, nurse practitioner, nurse and anesthetist, if I have that right, nurse specialist and nurse specialist in psychiatric mental health. And the question was, aren't we just creating, if we create more licensing, aren't we having this barrier to entry? And this is one of those balances where we saw it as a protection issue where folks are holding themselves out as being these individuals without the certification. So they're not as regulated, they're watched. When it comes to healthcare, balance that we wanted to strike was to have them be certified. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. If you had questions that we missed or other questions popped to mind, of course, you know how to reach us. I'm going to put my info in the chat. I know Senator Halpern will as well. And of course, you can find us on the website. It will be a mad dash now to day 40. So think about us, pray for us if that's your thing, because we could use it as we try to make it to the end here.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We typically do one more of these once we get past Ani Die, which is going to be March 29th. So today was day 30 of our 40 legislative days. So we are quickly coming on the end of it, and we will schedule another one to tell you kind of what ends up getting onto the governor's desk by the time we get to the end of this session. And in the meantime, oh, I didn't type that out quite right, but email us, sign up for our newsletters to keep in touch with what's happening, call us. We always want to be available and accessible to answer any of your questions and to really hear your thoughts and to know the things that are most important to you. So thank you for joining us again tonight, and until the next time.
Bye.